So, you're well underway. Your program has started, but your instincts tell you everything is not right. The schedules, the resources, things are just being replanned too frequently. And whether you've admitted it to yourself or not, your program is in danger of failure and in urgent need of recovery. Hi, my name is Carl Llewellyn, and today, over the next 15 minutes, myself and Lawrence Vesey are going to talk to you about what we call a Pathfinder program recovery. This is a three-step program to early identify, immediately turn around, and create mobilization and build in those programs which are struggling at the moment. I'm going to use one of those minutes to tell you very briefly about Pathfinder. At Pathfinder, we describe ourselves as consultants in management. We work with the senior teams in large organisations in Ireland and the UK, supporting them to realise their business objectives. We do this by improving the resource capability of their existing teams, helping them to deliver more for their customers. We work primarily in the areas of strategy, change and execution, and all things digital in your business, making sure that every program is digitally prepared for your future. We work with a range of large clients across a variety of industries, including utilities, finance, agri, retail, pharmaceutical, and hospitality. Now, I'm going to hand over to Lawrence Vesey, who's going to take you through program recovery.
So first of all, recognizing projects that get into trouble. I'm sure all of you will be familiar with the slightly skeptical view of the world as presented by Dilbert in his cartoon series. And in this cartoon here, you can see the difference between the private conversations that happen with projects that are in trouble and that are stuck, where everybody who is connected to that project has lost confidence in it, recognizes where the issues are, and recognizes that it's going to fail. But in public, all of those things are brushed under the carpet, and the polite response is given, the optimistic response is given, and ultimately the wrong response is given as regards where that project is. And in many ways, Mark Twain in his book Innocents Abroad, which described his tourist travels in Europe at the end of the 19th century, this quote here, "Having lost sight of our objectives, we redoubled our efforts," summarizes quite well what often happens with projects that get into trouble. The leadership of that team recognize that they're stuck. They are doing their best, sometimes their honest best, to get back on track. That often results in the team working harder, making greater effort, but ultimately they're not necessarily going in the right direction. And again, that's another symptom of projects that are in trouble and taking the wrong actions around that. You might see for projects that are getting into trouble. So the first, which is often the official, and sometimes it's a late symptom, is where you see a second or subsequent request for more time or more resources and ultimately more budget to deliver that project's objectives. And that request will be making its way to the sponsor or the program steering board or investment committee. And that can often be an indicator that the project is in trouble, but it can also be quite a late indicator that the project is in trouble. For the leadership closer to the program, some of the symptoms that start to show up are where there's a bit of papering over the cracks, where some of the optimistic early milestones that were going to be achieved aren't quite achieved and a best face has been put on them, where the leadership of the project is finding excuses around different items not being ready or some excuse as to why the program has missed its early milestones. The project team may be working noticeably harder, trying to catch up or just to stand still relative to where they should be on the program. And perhaps most insidious of all, and this is particularly the case in a large program, is where there is a first to fail culture developing. And what this means is A program has got multiple projects. Each of those projects may find and feel that they are in trouble. However, the leadership of those projects have the opinion that there is another project that is in worse trouble than they are, and they believe that that project will fail publicly before they do, and that they can then use that failure as their excuse to get out of jail. And that getting out of jail might be replanning the entire program, it might be getting more budget, it might be getting more resources, but they will be able to use that project as their excuse for why they're not going to deliver. And that is the most insidious symptom of all. And as soon as you see that happening anywhere on a big program, the alarm bells need to start ringing. What do we mean then by project and program recovery? For us in Pathfinder, it really means to get as close as possible to the original business value within the original budget and time that was set by the project sponsor. In Pathfinder, recovery is not simply replanning, although replanning might be required. Equally, it's not purely around getting more budget or more resources, although more budget ultimately and more resources ultimately may be required. The key thing for us is making sure that we're very clear around where exactly is the project, and in our terms we use the phrase full drains up, and this is really a challenge to all of the key leaders on the team and the key performers on the team, that they have to be very, very open and honest around where exactly they are. And part of the role that we play is to play a very strong and rigorous diagnosis around what exactly is going on, where exactly the project is, and really try to get an honest and accurate picture as to where the program is at. That diagnosis and that picture should show clearly how big a gap there is, how big a risk there is, and that should give you a good view as to how big a problem you have to deal with in the context of your program. So it's not enough though just to see that I'm 3 months behind, or I'm short 10 resources, or I need another $1 million to go to deliver this program. You also need to get a clear diagnosis of the underlying causes, and not just the obvious symptoms on the surface. And what we mean here is that if you haven't got a clear understanding as to why that program got into trouble in the first place, there's a pretty good chance that it will get into trouble again later on. And what we have seen on other projects in other clients that we've worked with over the years, some of the underlying causes are down to either the leadership of the team not being appropriate, not being strong enough, key roles on the team either missing or not clear, objectives of the program overly ambitious, not clear, and the commitments ultimately that need to be lined up to deliver on those ambitions and objectives are either missing or aren't properly resourced and staffed up. And if you are not clear around what the key underlying causes are, the project will fail again after your intervention efforts. One of the key questions that we ask as part of the recovery process here is, does this project still make sense? And that can be a challenging question to ask, because any project that's got momentum and has got a certain amount of publicity around it, it may be very difficult for sponsors and leaders to decide to cancel that project or to cancel a subset of that project. But if it doesn't make sense, if the world has moved on, if some of the original assumptions that caused that part of the project to be originally constituted and set up, if they no longer apply, then you're just going to throw good money after bad, continuing with that part of the project. And in an extreme case, continuing with that program. So that's a key question that has to get asked, and it tends to bring a really clear sense of reality to investors and to key stakeholders around, are they still committed with this project to move forward? And then lastly, when you are looking at what the key interventions are that you need to focus on here, it's important not to try to solve all of the problems in one go. Again, particularly in a large program. And a key part here is to prioritize and focus on key interventions. Typically that will be on the leadership, and that'll be focused around key roles and commitments, which we'll come on to shortly. In the same way, when we spoke earlier about setting up a new program and getting a project set up and established quickly to give it the best chance of success, we spoke that a program was a network of commitments with the customers, with a project team delivering, with a requirement to be clear around what the value was that we were looking to deliver, with clear roles for everybody on the program, with clear commitments for all of the people that were there to deliver on the objectives to the customer, and with a clear and realistic expectation on the customer's part of what he was going to get and when he is going to get it. And that network of commitments is equally important in the context of program recovery. And a key part from a diagnosis perspective is getting clear on what exactly was agreed initially when that program was set up. Was the customer clear on what he was asking for? Were the commitments that the project team made realistic? Had they been grounded out? Had the approach been thought through? Had everybody been clear about their own individual commitments around what they needed to deliver on? And then where exactly were the breakdowns happening in terms of delivery? And in the context of the recovery, rightly or wrongly, everybody will have some understanding as to what their role is. Everyone will have some understanding as to who their customer is. Everyone will have some understanding as to what they need to deliver. And everyone will have some understanding as to when they're expecting to see it. And if all of those are not aligned, it's very, very important to start aligning the key parts of that network as quickly as possible and making sure all of them still make sense. Also, in particular, when you're looking at the network of commitments, it's important to refocus in on the key players again. So for our investor, it's important for the investor to remain a strong customer. He needs to be clear about his objectives, particularly in the context of recovery. He needs to be clear around what he's prepared to continue to do in terms of investing in this project. He also needs to be clear around, what is the bottom line where he's not prepared to go past. So that he's also clear around, what risk is he carrying here in the context of this project. For our visionary, the person whose role is to hold the longer term vision for what the program is looking to deliver, very important for that role to make sure that they are clear around the difference between a vision and the difference between a dream. And sometimes projects that get into trouble, part of the problem resides in the visionary getting overly ambitious, overly aspirational, and having a dream that ultimately is disconnected from either what's possible or what the team are capable of delivering on. The designer needs to stay very connected to what was the business case and for the sake of what is the design and all of the engineering that's going into the project being produced. And we've seen in a number of clients over the years where the key designer on the program has gotten carried away with design just for the sake of having beautiful engineering, having the latest technology, having incredible complexity, and missing the original business case, which was to deliver some solution that works for the investor and delivers benefit to customers. And it's very important that the designer stays clearly connected to that, because that gives the project team that's delivering that design a much better chance of being successful. And then lastly, and this is the key role that in the context of recovery has the greatest level of spotlight on it, the executor. And the executor is typically boils down to being either the project manager or the program manager. And it may be that the project got into trouble because the executor was not up to the task and was not appropriate for that role. It may be a case that the program got into trouble for reasons entirely outside of the executor's control. And indeed, the executor may have been the key person to bring it to the investor's attention, where the problem is and what needed to get done. In some cases, the executor can continue in the role and continue to be successful here, but may need help or may need to change his role. In other cases, it may be necessary to change the role of the executor. And this is not necessarily saying that the previous person in this role has been a bad person or has been poor at doing their role, but to give the wider team a clean start, to rebuild energy, to rebuild the focus on the future rather than the past, it may be necessary to change the executor's role here and either move that person to a different role within the program or to move that person outside the program altogether. And it's not for nothing that in the context of sport that changing the manager of the team is often one of the key changes that need to get made to revitalising a team that are underperforming and to turn around the team's season over regardless of the sport or the discipline that it's in. And that may often be unfair, and those managers can go on to be highly successful elsewhere. And that's also the case here with the person that's holding the project manager or the program manager role. Whoever is holding that role, however, a key part of what they need to be doing is focusing on the network of commitments we mentioned earlier and making sure that they are managing all of those commitments there, and they're not just purely with a list of tasks to do and ticking off those tasks, because managing commitments is ultimately a key part of the recovery process. So to summarize, in terms of going forward and rebuilding trust and recovering projects, project recovery ultimately is all about rebuilding trust. In our experience, it's important to go for small early wins that can rebuild confidence in the team, both for themselves and for their stakeholders. It can rebuild momentum on the program. For the new leader of the project, if there is one, it can establish their credibility early. If the leader is the same leader on the program as it was at the start, it can rebuild their own confidence and confidence in their role. Key first step is really acknowledging where we are and having an agreed plan on how to recover. Building in early deadlines to focus the whole team's attention on, with early phase releases or stage gates to get through that have got meaningful deliverables, is a key thing that will establish confidence that progress has been made. And then in the remobilization process with all of the team that are on the project, it is very important to have honest conversations. It's very important to have a high level of energy. It's important that everybody on the project and the team are committed to recovering the project successfully and to doing what they need to do themselves to bring it back on track. And where appropriate, people need to take responsibility for what has gone wrong in the past, but it's not that useful engaging in a culture of blame, because ultimately all of that is in the past and it's not going to fix the actions that needs to happen going forward in the future. And if anything, it's likely to be a negative use of energy in the context of a recovery program. So that summarizes some of our experience around recognizing projects that get into trouble and some things to consider as part of rebuilding and going forward. We'll be happy to talk to you in more detail about some specific clients where we've seen such scenarios happen and the work that we've done with them to bring them back onto track.
Well, any questions or comments? We'd love to hear them. Please email us using our first name, last name at pathfinder.ie. Of course, these presentations you've heard from Lawrence Vesey, Paul Fagan, and myself, Carl Llewellyn. Find out more about us and the rest of the senior team at Pathfinder at our web address, pathfinder.ie/about-us/team. While you're there, please take a look at our case studies of our work with clients across our range of programs at pathfinder.ie, our work. Alternatively, please feel free to call us. We'd love to hear from you at either our Dublin or Edinburgh office to the number displayed on screen, or also available on our website. Call us and tell us about the challenges and programs, exciting plans that you have for your future. Thank you.